Well, hello everyone. I hope you're having a great day today. Welcome to Tuesday's edition of Take 5. We are in the subject that it's in the form of a question. It's this: God, is that you? And what we're trying to do is determine the voice of God over all of the other voices that are often speaking in our life, all of the other voices and sounds that are competing for our ear and for our attention. That's what we've got to do, is recognize God over all of those other things. And that's going to help us as we go through this life, because we're going to know what God wants, what God intends. We're going to know His plan and His purpose for our life. It's going to help us with decisions that we need to make in life, but we've got to be familiar with His voice. Revelation chapter 3, verse number 20 says, Jesus is talking. He said, "Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in and eat with him and he with me." So he's looking for constant reciprocation. Notice what he said: I'll eat with him and he will eat with me. He's looking for that fellowship, that back and forth, that give and take, that daily walk is what he is looking for in his people. God's not looking for weekend visitations. He's looking for someone that will walk with him and talk with him and reciprocate with him on a daily basis, to the point that we get so familiar with him that we know his voice and we know when it's him knocking, and we open the door only for him and we leave everything else outside. That constant reciprocation, that kind of relationship, that's what Jesus is wanting, and that's what breeds familiarity in our relationship with him. The more you hear his voice, the more familiar it becomes, and the less outside sources can interfere and cause confusion in your life. Great example of that's found in the Old Testament, 1 Samuel chapter number 3. Hannah has brought her young son because of a vow she made to God. She has brought her young son to live there at the temple and serve the Lord and serve the priest there continually. And she leaves him there as soon as he's old enough to feed himself and take care of himself and all that kind of stuff. She leaves him there. So he's a very young child when she takes him and leaves him. And he begins to serve Eli the priest. And so he's doing all of the things that he can to serve him. He's carrying out the ashes. He's making sure the shovels and the tongs and all of the instruments that they use for the sacrifice, they stay clean. He's taking care of all of these things and anything else that Eli needs him to. Well, one day, Eli goes and lays down, and Samuel goes to his quarters and he lays down. And God speaks to Samuel and calls him by name. Well, when he does, Samuel doesn't know who this is, because the Bible said the word of the Lord was very rare. It was very precious during those times. God wasn't speaking a whole lot, but he's about to start speaking more than he ever has, really, to his people, because Samuel's going to be the first of the priests, or the prophets rather, and God's going to be speaking through these men to his people. So Samuel jumps up out of bed. The only person he thinks it can be is Eli. He runs in there into Eli's room and says, "Yes, sir, did you call me?" Eli said, "Boy, I didn't call you. Go back and lay down. It wasn't me." Samuel goes back to his room. He lays down. He shuts his eyes and begins to drift off, and God calls him again, "Samuel." And he jumps up again, thinking that it's Eli. He runs in there because he's a good servant boy. He runs in there. "Eli, what do you want? Did you call me?" "Son, I did not call you. You need to stop coming in here waking me up. Go back to bed." Samuel goes back into his room, lays down in his bed, shuts his eyes, and again, "Samuel," that voice booms out of nowhere. He jumps up again, runs in there and says, "Eli, I heard you call me. Somebody's calling me. Yeah, it had to be you." The old priest realizes now that God is trying to talk to Samuel, and he knows that Samuel's not familiar. As a matter of fact, there's one verse that interrupts this story that says that Samuel did not yet know the voice of the Lord because he wasn't familiar with it. So Eli tells him, says, "Samuel, go back in there, son. It's God trying to talk to you. Go back in there. And when you go back, the next time you hear that voice, say, 'Speak, Lord, your servant hears.'" And so Samuel goes back in and he lays down. And again, that voice calls to him, "Samuel." And this time he says, "Speak, Lord, your servant hears." And God begins to talk to Samuel about some things that he's going to do and some things that he's going to bring into Eli's family, some judgment and other things that he's going to do in Israel. And from that day forward, the relationship between God and Samuel grows stronger and stronger and stronger. In fact, God said this about Samuel, that he never let one word that Samuel spoke fall to the ground. God was that close and that connected. I mean, he used him to anoint Saul as king and anoint David as king. And I mean, God used this man greatly, but it started out with a young boy that did not know the voice of the Lord, but over time, little by little, he grew familiar with the voice of God. That concept of familiarity is what Jesus was talking about in John 10 when he said, let me read it, verse 1. Truly I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, but climbs by any other way, is a thief and a robber. But he that enters in by the door is the shepherd of the sheep. To him the gatekeeper opens. The sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name, and he leads them out. When he's brought them out, all his own, he goes before them, and the sheep follow him, for they know his voice. They're familiar with his voice. And the stranger they'll not follow, but they will flee from him, for they do not know the voice of strangers. If you could picture these Middle Eastern sheepfolds, they were a community enclosure. There would be multiple shepherds with their sheep inside of these enclosures at night. In the morning, when it was time to lead them out to green pastures and still waters, the shepherd of the sheep would walk up to that gate. The gatekeeper would open it, and he would call his sheep by name. And the only sheep that would come out were the ones that were familiar with that shepherd's voice. The ones that knew him, the ones that he had named, that's the only ones that would come out because they were familiar. Jesus said that you and I are supposed to be like that. We're supposed to know his voice above all others. Now, the very fact that that passage said they won't follow a stranger means that there are going to be times, and it happens a lot of times, when we're going to hear strange voices. Now, I don't mean like you're psychotic or anything like that, but we're going to hear voices that want to lead us in directions other than what God is intending. And the fact is, we should never be deceived by that. We should never be caught off guard, because if we are in that constant communication, communing with God and dining with him and he dining with us on a daily basis, we should know his voice when he speaks. We should know when he knocks, and he is the only one that we should ever open the door and allow in our life. Hey, I've got to get out of here. It's been good being with you today. I look forward to being with you tomorrow on Wednesday's edition of Take 5. Till then, God bless you. Have a great day. Hey, trust the Lord, my friend. He will never fail you.